Unsponsored long-term reviews are pretty few and far between on YouTube, so today I'm going to put that right and give you my long-term thoughts on the Deltec 600i skimmer, which I've had for 2 years now. And if it's your first time here and you want a new reefing video every week, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out when I upload. First up, I want to talk to you about maintenance. Now normally I avoid cleaning skimmers, not necessarily because it's hard to do, but because when you clean a skimmer, it goes absolutely crazy for about 3 days and takes ages to dial back into the right level. So is it the same story with the Deltec? Now it's really easy to disassemble because it is held together with thumb screws, although calling them thumb screws is a little bit misleading because after a while of being in your sump, they do tend to seize up, so I couldn't turn them with my hands and I had to use a kitchen knife to undo them. But apart from that, cleaning was really easy, it was easy enough to disassemble, and it was also easy to take apart all the bits you needed and access everything else for cleaning, so I just chucked it in the sink with a bit of citric acid and let the dirt drip off for a couple of hours. Now the Deltec skimmer doesn't have as many internal parts as most skimmers, so taking it apart and cleaning it really is easy. But what happened when I reconnected it? Did it go crazy again? Well, both times I've cleaned this skimmer in the 2 years I've had it, it has been absolutely fine and an absolute pleasure after cleaning. All I've had to do is temporarily turn the power notch down on the pump by 1 point and then dial the water level down a tiny little bit so it's a little bit lower than the minimum level, and I've found that means that the skimmer cup doesn't overflow. Despite doing that, it skims slightly more wet than it normally did, but compared to all other skimmers I've had, it is an absolute joy, and for that reason I don't fear cleaning or adjusting it. In fact, in the 2 years I've had it, I've found that it never overflows and it always performs at pretty much the same level all the time. Performance never seems to drop and it skims as well on day 1 as it does on day 365 in between cleans. And for reference, my tank is around 450 litres and this skimmer is rated for tanks up to 600 litres, and I found it to be pretty much spot on for my tank. So it's a big tick for cleaning, but what about the practicalities and functions? Now on most skimmers there aren't an awful lot of functions, but there are a few clever little features on the Deltec that make a real difference and make life a little bit easier. For example, it has 2 tubes on the side of the skimmer, one to show you the water level and one that has a dial to adjust the water level. And it doesn't matter which way round those tubes go, so if you prefer to have the dial at the front and the water level tube at the back, you can switch them around nice and easy, and while that's a very small thing, it just makes life a little bit easier and it's a nice little touch. Now aside from the fact that you can switch them over, those tubes are my absolute favourite feature of this skimmer. With most skimmers I've had, I find it really difficult to dial it in, but with this one, because you can see the water level in the tube, you can see exactly what difference it makes when you turn the water level screw. And that means that you can set it to skim wet or dry really easily and with absolutely no fuss whatsoever. Now because this skimmer has a DC pump, it is almost silent and you can't hear it outside of the cabinet. Now as with all equipment, if you don't clean it, it gets a tiny little bit louder as it starts to buzz because it's working harder than it should do. But even after a year or so of not cleaning it, it's still really quiet and I can't hear it outside of my cabinet, which for me is the litmus test. The skimmer cup is also really easy to remove. It has a little twist locking mechanism, so you just give it a slight turn and it pops off, which of course makes it easy to empty and clean the skimmer cup itself, but the downside is that this doesn't come with a drain as standard, so you have to empty it more often than you would do if it came with a little drain plug. Now I installed a DIY drain, which means that I don't have to take the skimmer cup off so much, and it was really easy to do, so I'll link a card at the top of the screen if you want to see how I did it. And while there's no drain on the 400i or the 600i, the 1000i does get a drain as standard, and it is much better than the one I made. It also has a connector for a CO2 scrubber. Now I recently tried hooking it up to a CO2 scrubber, but I found that it didn't actually work. I don't know if there's a leak somewhere in the silencer box or maybe in the tube somewhere, but it didn't pull air exclusively through my CO2 scrubber, and as you can see from the colour change media in my CO2 scrubber, it only used a tiny amount, which is the coloured bit at the bottom, over the course of about 2 months, whereas normally I'd expect a skimmer to burn through this much media in around a week or 2. Now I don't know if that's unique to my skimmer or if it's one of the drawbacks of the poor build quality. As I said in my first video, it is made of really thin materials and they are quite scratchy and feel quite cheap. Now for me personally, I don't care about that because it is such a good skimmer and it makes up for it elsewhere. But if you're used to a high build quality skimmer like a Nios, you might be a bit disappointed in the way it feels, although the plus side is that it is much lighter, so a little bit easier to take out the sump. Along with the cheap build quality, one of my other reservations on first impressions was the cheap pump. While it is nice and quiet, it's made by Jecod, which is not necessarily the first choice if you are looking for pure longevity. However, as you will know if you watch the channel, I'm a huge fan of Jecod return pumps and I run them on both my tanks. I did have one issue after about a year where the pump suddenly turned off, but I just pulled the plug out, pushed it back in, and it started working again. Now, while I think the Jecod pump is a good thing and I don't really care about the poor build quality, for £380 you might expect a little bit more because it is quite an expensive skimmer. But I personally love this skimmer and I would happily buy it again. It has a few really cool features. I've found the performance to be completely consistent for the full 2 years I've had it. It's almost completely silent, and most importantly, I know it won't go crazy if I adjust it, move it, or even clean it. And that is huge for me because I've always had those problems with other skimmers. So as far as I'm concerned, the pros of this skimmer heavily outweigh the cons. Now, whether it's the best skimmer in this price range, I can't say, and there might be other skimmers that have features that you value over the features that this has. But what I can say is that I don't think you'd regret buying it. I found it to be reliable, consistent and quiet, and there's no other skimmer in this price range that I'd personally buy. If you enjoyed the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe for next week, and until next time, happy reefing.